A Roman emperor once declared war on the ocean itself. The year was around 40 AD, and Emperor Caligula ordered his legions to attack the sea. They whipped the waves, hurled spears into the water, and gathered seashells as the spoils of their victory over the god Neptune. This is one of history's most bizarre stories, a tale that has echoed for 2,000 years. By the end of this journey, you will uncover the startling truth behind this surreal campaign, separating ancient propaganda from the real man. Was this the final proof of a ruler's madness, or a brilliant, twisted stroke of political genius? What does it truly mean when a leader wages war against nature? To understand why a war on the ocean seemed plausible, we must first meet the man. Gaius Caesar, better known as Caligula, did not start as a monster. He began his rule in the year 37 amid a wave of public adoration. Rome was weary from the grim, paranoid reign of his great-uncle Tiberius, who had retreated to the island of Capri. Caligula was young, charismatic, and the beloved son of the popular war hero Germanicus. The people saw in him a return to the golden age of his famous ancestors, Julius Caesar and Augustus. For the first few months, he was generous, recalling political exiles and hosting lavish public games. He was the people's emperor, and hope was everywhere. But that hope curdled with terrifying speed. Ancient historians, primarily Suetonius and Tacitus, chronicle a dramatic and disturbing shift. After a severe illness just months into his rule, they claim the emperor's personality shattered. The generous young man vanished, replaced by a cruel and capricious tyrant. The anecdotes they report are the foundation of his infamous legend. He was said to have declared himself a living god, ordering temples built in his honor and demanding that statues of other deities be beheaded and replaced with his own likeness. He reportedly discussed making his favorite horse, Incitatus, a consul of Rome, even providing the animal with a marble stable and an ivory manger. The stories grew darker, alleging extreme cruelty toward senators, arbitrary executions, and scandalous personal behavior that violated every Roman norm. These tales, repeated for centuries, painted a portrait of a ruler utterly unbound from reality. This was the political climate in which the Ocean War story took root. Rome was a powder keg. The Senate, once powerful, lived in fear. The real power often lay with the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal military force, whose loyalty Caligula had secured with massive cash payments. The state treasury, once overflowing from Tiberius's frugality, was being drained by the new emperor's wild spending on construction and spectacle. In this atmosphere of fear, financial strain, and perceived insanity, a story about the emperor ordering legions to attack the sea did not sound like a metaphor. To the people of Rome and to the historians who wrote it down, it sounded like just another Tuesday. It fit the established pattern of a man who recognized no limits, not even the natural laws of the world. But what if that pattern itself was part of a much larger and more calculated story? The turning point arrived on a windswept beach, likely along the coast of Gaul facing the English Channel. It was the year 40, and Emperor Caligula had marched his legions north with a grand ambition, the conquest of Britain. The army was assembled, the ships were prepared, and the moment for invasion had come. Then, suddenly, it did not. Instead of giving the order to embark, the emperor turned his gaze toward the rolling gray waves. He declared that the ocean itself, personified by the god Neptune, had disobeyed his divine command. The sea was too rough, too treacherous for his glorious campaign. In the eyes of Rome's commander, this was not a weather delay. It was an act of insubordination from a divine rival. And so he declared war. The orders that followed have baffled historians for millennia. He commanded his battle-hardened legionaries, the most disciplined fighting force in the ancient world, to line up along the shore. Their task was not to board their transports, but to attack the water itself. They raised their whips and lashed at the incoming waves, punishing the sea for its defiance. They hurled their javelins and spears into the surf, a volley meant for an enemy that could not be wounded. The scene was a surreal parody of Roman military ritual, a solemn act of violence directed at an indifferent element. After this symbolic battle, Caligula declared a complete and total victory. The ocean god had been subdued, but every conquest requires spoils, so the emperor ordered his soldiers to gather the only trophies the beach had to offer. They filled their helmets and the folds of their tunics with seashells, cowrie shells, and pieces of smooth sea-worn stone. These, he proclaimed, were the plunder of the deep, the riches of the conquered ocean. To cement his triumph, he reportedly ordered the construction of a tall lighthouse, a permanent monument to his dominance over the treacherous waters. The campaign was over. The legions then turned and marched for home, their invasion of Britain abandoned, their baggage now heavy with shells. He planned a full triumph in Rome, a parade where the spoils of Neptune would be displayed before a bewildered populace. This is the story that sealed his legacy as a madman. But what if we are reading the script of this play entirely wrong? What if every bizarre action was a deliberate line delivered to a very specific audience? The shells gathered on that beach were more than just curiosities, they were a message. But to decipher it, we must move past the simple label of madness and listen to what the emperor might have been trying to say. Historians and psychologists have spent decades piecing together the possible motives behind this surreal performance, and their theories reveal a man trapped in a complex web of power, perception, and propaganda. The first and oldest explanation is the madness theory, drawn straight from the ancient texts. The Roman historians Suetonius and Cassius Dio, writing decades after Caligula's death, present his entire reign as a descent into insanity, with the ocean war as its pinnacle. Modern scholars have tried to diagnose this from a distance, suggesting a severe illness like encephalitis could have caused brain damage, altering his personality. Others point to the very real danger of lead poisoning in Rome, from lead pipes and sweetened wine, which can cause erratic behavior and cognitive decline. If we take the ancient accounts at face value, the act makes a tragic kind of sense, the final break of a mind that could no longer distinguish metaphor from reality, symbol from substance. But a second, more cynical theory has gained ground, the political theater theory. This view sees Caligula not as a madman, but as a master manipulator, using absurdity as a weapon. His legions, particularly those inherited from his father's campaigns, were fiercely loyal to Germanicus's memory, not necessarily to his son. By ordering them to perform a meaningless, humiliating task, he was brutally asserting his absolute authority, demonstrating that their purpose was to obey, not to question. For the Senate in Rome, hearing reports of the emperor collecting seashells as plunder, the message was equally terrifying. It communicated that their traditional values of military honor and rational governance meant nothing. He was above their logic, a living god whose whims were law, even if that law commanded a war with the sea. The act was a power play of shocking brilliance, reducing every institution of the state to a prop in his personal drama. A third perspective offers a different kind of calculation, the practical prank or face-saving theory. This suggests the British invasion was aborted for very real, very mundane reasons. Perhaps the legions, aware of the dangers across the Channel, were on the verge of mutiny. Maybe the treasury was finally empty and the funds for a prolonged campaign simply weren't there. Calling off the invasion outright would be a public admission of failure, a devastating blow to an emperor's prestige. So he staged an alternative. By declaring war on the ocean and claiming victory, he transformed a military retreat into a divine triumph. The gathered shells became proof not of poverty but of conquest. It was an elaborate, face-saving joke played on the entire empire, allowing him to return to Rome not as a failed general, but as a victor who had chosen a new, more poetic enemy. So who do we believe? The biased senators who hated him and had every reason to paint him as a monster, or the modern analysts looking for rational motives in irrational acts? The truth is likely a tangled knot of all these threads. A man possibly struggling with mental or physical illness, yet acutely aware of the precariousness of his power, using shocking spectacle to control the narrative. He wasn't just fighting the ocean, he was fighting perception itself. And in that struggle, the most dangerous enemy was not the waves, but the story that would be told about him long after he was gone. That single act on the beach ensured his name would never be forgotten, but it also cemented a specific legacy. The story of the sea war did not fade with the Roman Empire. Instead, it evolved into the ultimate shorthand for tyrannical madness, a cultural touchstone repeated for 2,000 years. Whenever a later emperor behaved with shocking extravagance or cruelty, historians and critics immediately reached for the comparison to Caligula. When Nero famously fiddled during the Great Fire of Rome, or when Commodus fought as a gladiator in the arena, they were not just acting badly. In the eyes of their contemporaries, they were channeling the same divine arrogance, the same contempt for tradition that had once sent legions to fight the tide. Caligula became the archetype, the benchmark against which all subsequent misrule was measured. This legacy blossomed in art and literature long after Rome fell. Renaissance painters depicted the scene with a mixture of horror and fascination. The emperor often shown as a grandiose figure commanding futile violence against nature itself. Playwrights and poets used the anecdote as a perfect metaphor for hubris, for the moment when human ambition declares war on forces it can never hope to control. The story was simply too powerful, too visually and symbolically rich to be left in the history books. It was a ready-made parable about the madness of absolute power. In the modern era, popular culture has relentlessly revisited and reinterpreted this image. The groundbreaking television series I, Claudius, for instance, presented Caligula as a chilling, capricious god-king, with the ocean war serving as a key scene demonstrating his detachment from reality. The controversial film Caligula leaned into the spectacle and decadence, using the event to highlight the surreal excess of his court. These portrayals, while dramatized, keep the core question alive for new audiences. Was this the act of a psychotic mind, or a calculated performance designed to terrorize and control? Our modern retellings cannot resist the puzzle. Yet, standing in stark contrast to these vivid stories is a profound silence from the archaeological record. No ancient inscription commemorates the victory over Neptune. No trove of legionary helmets filled with shells has been unearthed. The physical evidence for this most famous event is essentially non-existent. This absence is not proof it didn't happen, but it forces historians to work like detectives sifting through contaminated evidence. Every account we have was written by men who hated him, who benefited from painting the former emperor as a monster to justify his assassination and praise the senators who killed him. Their goal was not balanced reporting but moral instruction. So we are left to peel back the layers of propaganda to ask why this particular story was included and amplified. Was it because it was true or because it perfectly fit the narrative they needed to sell? This is why the story endures not as a settled fact but as a fascinating historical mirror. The war on the ocean reflects less about Caligula's state of mind and more about our own perpetual need to understand power gone wrong. It challenges us to separate the man from the myth, to wonder how our own leaders might be remembered if their stories were written solely by their enemies. The waves he commanded his soldiers to strike have long since receded, but the echoes of that day still shape how we think about madness, authority, and the very nature of history itself. The story of Caligula and the sea is a battle fought not with swords but with symbols. For centuries, we have been presented with a clear villain, a ruler so unhinged he waged war against the ocean and claimed seashells as his plunder. This single, surreal event became the perfect evidence for his madness, a story repeated by his enemies and cemented by history. Yet, as we have seen, the truth lies buried beneath layers of political motive and ancient propaganda. The competing explanations, from a mind shattered by illness to a coldly calculated performance of power, reveal a man operating within a pressure cooker of fear, ambition, and divine pretension. This is not merely a tale of one emperor's eccentricity. It is a profound lesson in how history is written by the victors and how a single, bizarre anecdote can eclipse the complex human being behind it. It challenges us to look beyond the label of madness and see the struggle for control, the desperate need to command a narrative in a world where perception was the ultimate currency. So we are left with a final, lingering question. When you look at that beach, at the soldiers lashing the waves and gathering shells, who do you see? Do you see a madman completely detached from reality, a master manipulator using absurdity to terrorize his subjects and save face? Or perhaps a tragic figure, a young man broken by illness and expectation, forever trapped inside the monstrous legend his enemies created? The answer you choose says as much about how we understand power today as it does about ancient Rome. Let us know in the comments below, which theory do you believe? Cast your vote for madness, for political genius, or for tragic fate. And if you want to join us as we unravel more of history's greatest mysteries, be sure to subscribe.